Thank you very much, George. It's always a pleasure, always an honor. I don't know what's going to happen. I think the chances for the United States to do the stupid thing, the foolish thing, is very high. And I believe that all these riots, the fall of the Iranian currency, all of this was a conspiracy to get us to this point. The currency fall was due to U.S. manipulation. And then we had protests, not very large, but nothing happened in those protests. There are no arrests, no harassment. The police did not intervene. Unlike in the UK, as you pointed out, where old Jewish women holding placards against suicide go to jail. Or in Germany, where young women carrying or wearing a keffiyeh in solidarity with Palestinians get battered by police. Nothing happened. And then we had the infiltration of these vicious rioters. Vicious rioters who Pompeo said Mossad is standing beside them on the streets. He said that in his tweet. Vicious rioters who the Mossad itself, in a Persian statement put out, which is widely published, said that we are on the streets with the rioters. Rioters which Channel 14 of the Israeli regime said are being armed from governments abroad. The Israeli regime admits it, but Western pundits, Western regimes deny it. This is one of the extraordinary things in the world that we live today. And so those violent riots where 100 police officers and 200 riot police volunteers, Basij, and Revolutionary Guards alongside them, 200 to 300 were killed. In other words, 300 to 400 people were murdered, police officers. And then the audacity of Western media to say that these were peaceful protests. And then I was on Piers Morgan, of course, after you advised me to participate, and he was denying or trying to deny the mass protests on Monday supporting the Constitution of Iran, supporting the state institutions against the rioters and the violence and the murders carried out by these extremists. And he was saying that these are possibly AI. They are possibly fabricated. So on the one hand, Western media speaks with great knowledge about the crimes being carried out by the Iranians, and even though there's no internet and they have no presence, but they cannot confirm, and that's what his producer after the show said to me. She sent a message, we cannot confirm the demonstrations in Iran. So even though the demonstrations that were held across the country, in Tehran it was 2.3 million people to 3 million people, even though there was rolling coverage the whole day, even though it was being carried out, these demonstrations across the country, it wasn't just in one city, it was in all the cities. And the crowds were massive, but they said we cannot confirm these things. So I think that it's clear that this was to push this whole conspiracy, this fall in the currency and the subsequent riots, the riots that took advantage of the legitimate protests. This was to push us to where we are now, to justify murder and slaughter. And you see that the political establishment in the West, they're all supporting it. Just like they supported the Israeli genocidal attacks on Iran, the Europeans supported it. The sinister German chancellor said that the Israelis do our dirty work for us. And you see that in the United States, whether it's AOC or Trump, they all say we must help the Iranian people. How do they want to help the Iranian people? By bombing them. And of course, this makes sense for the Americans who've been trying to strangle the Iranian people through maximum pressure sanctions for decades. They try to prevent Iranians from having jobs through sanctions. They try to prevent them from accessing medicine. This is the sinister regime that is pretending. This sinister regime and its allies are the ones pretending to be supportive of human rights, but they're the ones who are sending arms into the country. And you see the Western media, whether it's the liberal or the conservative, they're all saying the same thing. They're demonizing Iran to pave the way for death and destruction. So they want to come and save Iranians by killing Iranians. This is the logic of the West. It is not a new logic, but it's more crude. It's more crudely presented to us than before. Nowadays, when the United States wants to steal, it says it openly. Trump says Venezuelan oil is ours. And I think that, in a sense, is a good thing, because this declining empire, which is lashing out, is not only exposing itself through its crude actions increasingly, but through its crude language, it's exposing itself too. And we should not forget, or even for a moment forget, that the real reason for this antagonism and hostility is because the Iranians are the only people, alongside Yemen and Hezbollah and the Iraqi resistance, that support the people of Palestine, that oppose genocide, that oppose ethnic cleansing, that oppose ethno-supremacism. That is the reason why it is demonized. That's the reason why it's bombed and attacked, and the Western media collectively portrays it as barbaric and inhumane. They call Iran a regime, but Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, none of these are regimes. Why? Because they continue to do trade with the Israeli regime throughout the genocide, or they have political relations, or both. That is the reality that we're facing today. So now, after these days of riots and Western media pretending, unlike the Zionists, that these are all peaceful protesters, I think it's clear as day what the real agenda was.
What happens next?
George, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not even sure they will attack, although personally I think they will. I don't know what the size of the scale of the assault will be, but the Iranian response will be very robust. The Iranians have said it will be robust. And I personally think that things could spiral out of control. And the Iranians are not going to back down. The Americans have been sending all sorts of messages to Iran during the last few days. And I think it's because they know quite well that this is not good news for them. And so Trump foolishly put himself in a position where, as usual, he has no escape. And he thinks that Iran is going to bow down to the United States over Palestine or over its sovereignty. That's never going to happen. That's what the revolution was all about. That's why the Shah was kicked out of the country. So Trump, in his arrogance, I think probably him and his entourage, thinking that their tactical success, not strategic success, but their tactical success in Venezuela, because we'll have to see what happens in Venezuela. I do not believe that the Americans are going to get their way in Venezuela, knowing a thing or two about the country and having friends there, as you do, and I'm sure you have more friends and acquaintances there than I. But I think that the people of Venezuela are going to make sure that the United States does not steal its assets and its oil and its country from them. But in any case, I think his tactical success in Venezuela, which can't be denied, has made him drunk and the people around him drunk. He is not being fed, I think, correct information either. If you recall, a few days ago, he said that the second city of Iran, meaning Mashhad, has fallen. A city of, I think, 3 million. I don't know what madman told this person that Mashhad had fallen. Mashhad is larger than Birmingham. It's the size of Birmingham and Manchester combined. And for him to say that either shows that he has no idea what's really happening, or that he's just a fool who retweets or or sends out material that he's read online, which is equally dangerous. During the riots, during these very violent riots, these murderous riots where these terrorists and these killers were killing innocent people and targeting innocent people and targeting the police, not a village was taken by anyone. Iran's sovereignty and Iran, the state, was in full control throughout. And by the way, George, another reason, besides what I said earlier, and I sort of tilt away from your question here, another reason that proves that this was not spontaneous, these riots, was the fact that as soon as Iran cut off the internet, and you know I don't have internet, this is a studio, the Press TV studio, they allowed me to use their internet. As soon as Iran cut off the internet on Friday morning, we saw the riots go downhill. And on Saturday, they were almost non-existent. And on Sunday, Monday, now it's all quiet. Why? Because these teams of rioters, these vicious monsters that were battering people in the head with stones and crushing their faces, burning 2 young men alive in a mosque, trapping them and throwing Molotov cocktails, burning alive a young woman nurse in a clinic where they burned the clinic down, and she went upstairs and she stayed in the clinic because of the patients. The fire department rescued the patients, but she was stuck inside, and she went up the staircase, but the fire followed her and burned her alive. This is what these monsters were doing. They burned down tens of public buses, tens of fire engines, many ambulances. These are the peaceful protesters that the West talks about. But as soon as the internet was cut, we saw the rapid collapse of the riots. If they were spontaneous, then they would have continued. If they were spontaneous, then they would be on the streets as we speak today. But they aren't, because they were controlled from abroad. They were being managed from abroad. And when that connection disappeared, they became like headless chickens. So, and those people who think, George, that, or ask, is it possible for the narrative on Iran to be so flawed or so dishonest? If anyone really asks that question in this day and age, after well over 2 years of genocide in Gaza and slaughter in Lebanon and regime change in Syria and slaughter in Yemen, then I think that person must have been in a coma, because we've been living in this upside down world of Western morality for a very long time now. If anyone was to see Western media and Western regimes speak honestly about any country in the global South or the global majority, one should be shocked.
Well, the liberals and the Trotskyites can always be relied upon to end up on the side of the imperialist onslaught, and we are indeed seeing it today. You mentioned AOC. In the week, both Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana joined the attack on Iran alongside Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson. The execrable Owen Jones, the liberal Guardian journalist, he, of course, like a dog returning to its vomit, is back in the war party. He's the pink wing of the war party. They deploy the same tropes each time. That much you and I and most of our audience all know. But let's study the ontology of the actual perpetrators of this, because I think this is too little understood by the general public. There are the supporters of this ludicrous popinjay calling himself the Shah. There are supporters, too little analysed, of this weird cult of the Rajavis, the MEK. There are obviously infiltrators who have crossed Iran's borders perhaps as leaders, perhaps not necessarily the leaders. Who are these people? Go through them, if you will, and explain who and what they are.
Well, there are multiple groups, and they are all being coordinated by Western intelligence agencies. And by the way, when the CIA and the Mossad are involved, French and British intelligence are always with them. So this is an operation carried out by multiple agencies, but all these groups, which are at each other's throats, George, they hate each other. Even in their protests or their demonstrations in Europe against Iran, they beat each other up. Just during the last few days, there have been fist fights, and a car from one of the factions rammed into a crowd from the other faction. And these are, by the way, not a large number of Iranians abroad. Most Iranians living in the West, they're just living their private lives, and supporting Iran gets you into trouble. It gets you into trouble in the West anyway. So most people are quiet, but these people have a vested interest because they get lots of funding. You have a Persian media empire in the West, much larger than Iranian media, day and night attacking Iran. Hundreds of TV channels, a number of them very expensive, like Iran International or BBC Persian or Manoto, which gets lots of funding from the taxpayers in the UK and the US. And then you have all sorts of websites, and so a lot of people, and you have thousands of people who are online warriors in Albania. There are 4,000 people, I don't know the number, who sit there day and night with all sorts of accounts and different social media. All of this is funded by the West. And day and night they're attacking Iran. And Iran International, which is based in London, I tweeted this a few days ago. They're advocating violence in Iran. They're advocating armed attacks. The host, I posted it just a few days ago. So Ofcom will shut down all Iranian media, Persian, English, Arabic, Russian, Lebanese, Yemeni, all of them, even though none of them have ever threatened the West in any way or form. But in London itself, they allow people to promote violence and to promote armed violence, and then their governments themselves, go and fund and send weapons inside Iran. And then people, and I'm very disappointed in Corbyn, but I fail to be surprised nowadays. And then people, it's like Syria. It's amazing. It's like the Takfiris who were always opposed to Israel. Suddenly in Syria, they all aligned themselves, or the Takfiris were never against Israel because they were funded by Israel's allies always, but who pretended to be of a particular political persuasion against the United States, I suppose. When it came to the dirty war in Syria, they all hopped on board. They were all with the CIA. They were all calling this a blessed revolution. And they destroyed Syria and gave a tactical victory to Netanyahu. But these people are doing the same thing now. These so-called leftists, they're calling for helping the Iranian people. If they want to help the Iranian people, they should end the siege or the maximum pressure sanctions, which is intended to make people suffer in Iran. Which is intended to block Iranians from accessing medicine, which is intended to leave people without jobs, to ruin the fabric of society. Who are they to talk about Iran, especially at a time when their regimes are about to carry out war? If anyone is immoral, it is they and their regimes that are immoral. Just like in the case of Venezuela. The cowards, George, the most cowardly are the ones who pretend to be opposed to war, but who strengthen the narrative of war. Just like those who were talking about Maduro before the attacks. They say, yes, of course, Maduro is evil, he's horrible, but that sentence itself enables death and destruction. That is a cowardly position to take. Is Maduro evil or sinister, or is it the United States regime that is evil and sinister, which imposes sanctions on Venezuela, which murdered 100 people in the Caribbean and another 100 people when they kidnapped the lawful president of the country? When sanctions, maximum pressure sanctions, are being imposed on the Iranian people, and then war is imposed upon it, and then terrorists are sent into the country, trained and killing people on the streets, with the admission of the Mossad saying that they are involved, then these people go and condemn Iran. These are the most cowardly of them all. The neocons, the Zionists, which are one and the same, at least they're open about their sinister objectives. But those who feel the need to say that, no, we agree with you, these people are evil, the Maduros, the Iranians, they're all evil, but they're not really any different.
No, indeed you're right. Indeed, the aforementioned Owen Jones made the very point that you preanate about Maduro this very day. This is not the one, he said. Maduro stole the election. Maduro's been following neoliberal policies for years. But we are against American intervention. Of course, this is a well-trodden path. I ask that previous question because although, of course, I know you could not bear to contemplate the very idea of the collapse of the Islamic Republic, but for the rest of us, we have to imagine, we must be forced to imagine what would actually be the result if the Islamic Republic collapsed. There would be mass internecine warfare in the Persian Gulf on top of the oil and gas fields next to the Straits of Hormuz, with monarchists fighting MK terrorists, with all Israeli force intruding, and millions of supporters of the Islamic Republic would all be contesting for power in a civil war of unbelievable proportions. I just wonder if people ever contemplate that point.
George, in case of such a very, very unlikely scenario, nearly impossible, we saw the people of Iran go to the streets on Monday and stand in unity. And the West has been trying desperately to pretend as if it didn't happen. And really, I think that shows the dangers of the likes of Elon Musk and others who in future in your own countries will erase reality and through AI produce an alternative reality for people to believe. This is a very sinister move that we're seeing the West carry out when it comes to Iran, trying to erase the reality on the streets of Tehran and produce an alternative reality that's non-existent. But in this highly unlikely scenario, you will have tens of millions of people moving to Europe. You will have refugees from West Asia streaming towards Europe. And if we have a collapse in the global economy, you'll be seeing people across the world streaming towards North America and Europe. But George, Zionists don't care about Europe, and Zionists don't care about North America. They are Israel first. So they're willing to sacrifice those right-wing fanatics in London who support Israel. Israel doesn't care about them. It's willing to sacrifice all of them for the sake of the regime. The Zionists are willing to sacrifice the well-being of the people of Britain and France and Germany, as they are already, and the United States, for the sake of this illegitimate and ethno-supremacist regime. But, George, the reason why I say it's highly unlikely, if not almost impossible, is because, to be very blunt, George, this revolution was about dignity and honor. And this revolution is highly influenced, as you know, by the grandson of the Prophet. Those who know the story of Imam Hussein and his sister Zainab and Ashura and the stance that they took against oppression and injustice and the stance that they took for the sake of the oppressed, those who know the story understand Iranian culture and the resilience and the resistance of the Iranian people. That's what brought people to the streets, despite all the economic difficulties and all the pressure and all the threats that we've been facing for decades. That's what makes Iran supportive of the Palestinian people and willing to make sacrifices for them, because they support the oppressed, because they are steadfast, like the grandson of the Prophet. The story of Ashura is something that everyone should read about so that they can better understand what they're confronting. General Soleimani, in his speech before he was murdered by Trump, and by the way, his murder was proposed by Netanyahu, and then they were supposed to carry it out together, and Netanyahu pulled back at the last moment and left Trump to do it by himself. Why? Because Netanyahu and the Zionists want the United States to pay the price for what they wanted to do. And Trump, being Trump, whether because of Epstein or whatever reason, he did it as he is doing it now. But the resilience, the support of the Palestinian people that we see in Iran is because of this culture of resistance and because of this culture of supporting the oppressed. And no matter how much Western media tries to demonize Iran, no matter how much Qatar, this proxy of the United States, or Erdogan and his ISIS and Al-Qaeda proxies, or the Emiratis, no matter how much they use sectarianism to demonize the Iranian people will continue to support the Palestinian people, and they will resist, and they will preserve their sovereignty, and the United States will not win this war. And it is very sad, George, that people will have to die. It is very sad. You and I have been anti-war for many years. When in 2003, when you were at the forefront of the anti-war movement, I, an Iranian who suffered under Saddam Hussein, who was helped by the West, who was giving chemical weapons by the West, I was a part of the anti-war movement. Not because I had any love for Saddam, and neither did you. He was an evil monster. But the West created that monster. And the West had no moral right to involve itself in overthrowing the government of Iraq. And that is why we took that principled stance. And today, everyone who has any decency has to take a principled stance. The real evil is not in Iran, nor in Caracas. The real evil is in London, Washington, Tel Aviv, Paris, and Berlin.
Finally, Professor, on a personal note, you are obviously very widely respected. Now, I can't switch on the television without finding you on there, Channel 4 television, Sky, and of course the execrable Piers Morgan. He can't get enough of you either. But on the Piers Morgan show, we had the remarkable scene of a former Canadian member of Parliament, a Canadian citizen, sitting in Canada, publicly threatening you with murder and dismemberment. And she has now turned that into a tweet, which is still extant. So it's now under the regime of Elon Musk, under the regime of Piers Morgan, it is allowed to publicly threaten to murder and cut into small pieces a respected academic professor who's widely known to now hundreds of millions of people across the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, before I forgot to finish, General Soleimani, before he was murdered and martyred, he said that we are the nation of Imam Hussein. We're not afraid of these terrorists. And she is reflective of terrorism. She is a representative of terrorists. But why would any of us be surprised that Elon Musk and the likes that they would allow this to happen? It's these very same regimes that have been funding ISIS and Al Qaeda for decades through Turkey, through Jordan, in Syria, and Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan from the 1980s, when they've been the first textbooks that were printed, takfiri textbooks for school children in Afghanistan after the invasion of the Soviet Union. They were printed in the United States at an American university, the Nebraska Omaha University. So when they have been behind these takfiri groups, these Salafi, Wahhabi extremists that are funded by the likes of the Qatari regime, whose main mosque is the Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab Mosque, a takfiri regime like Saudi, so the Saudis have pulled back under Mohammed bin Salman from this ideology, but now the mantle is the standard bearer is now Qatar and Erdogan. But when the West supports these people, why not support this woman? But she is also exposing a reality, and that is that these extremists in Iran, these terrorists, they're like her. These rioters who are smashing people's heads, who are burning people alive, who beheaded people, they are like her. And the West supports them, and they support her. And Piers Morgan not only allowed her to say this, they knew who she was. Because his team does research on the guests. He wanted her there. In fact, they told me it would be a one-on-one. That was my condition for participating. And we exchanged messages. And he brought her in to tell me that on Monday, the rallies in Iran were fake, that they were not, that the footage was AI, which of course is ridiculous. And then she goes on to threaten me, as you rightly pointed out. But this is the world that we're living in. And then they call themselves civilized, and then they depict us as uncivilized. I don't consider her as important, and threats made from her or others like her should not intimidate any of us. Because if we are intimidated, then they win. I was in this building last time when I was on Piers Morgan's show, and they evacuated this building, and they were telling me to leave, and I kept telling his staff that I have to go. They're putting pressure, and they kept me. And then after 20, 30 minutes delay, Piers Morgan comes on and starts attacking Iran and lying about Iran and the situation in Iran, trying to demonize the country. Why? To justify war. Because the war is illegal. But when you demonize, when you say that, just like with Venezuela, just like when they say Maduro is evil, they're justifying war. They're helping the war effort. So these people who use this sort of language, these people who like Piers Morgan, they're no different from the neocons. They are neocons, but they try to pretend that they're different. But there's no real difference. Anyone who tries to refrain from telling the truth that the real evil is the warmongers who impose sanctions and who strangle countries across the world and who bomb countries, that they are not the real evil, and instead it's Maduro or someone else. Such people are no different. They're no different than the Richard Pearls, the Prince of Darkness. They're no different from them. They're all one and the same.